Those against, the ayes have it. Announcements.
Also laid on the table of the House today are two reports from the Integrity Commission. One, an investigation concerning allegations of fraud in relation to the registration and issuance of a notification of an approved supplier of goods and services to the Government of Jamaica, Letter to Elegant Weddings, Event Planning and Catering Limited, and a report of investigation concerning allegations of conflict of interest in the award of contract for artistic direction of the 2016 Independence Grand Gala celebration by the Jamaica Cultural Development Commission.
Madam Speaker, I beg to now recommit public business and to ask you to invite the Minister of Labour and Social Security and Member of Parliament for North Central St. Andrew to open the debate.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, today it is my honor and privilege to introduce for debate in the House the National Minimum Wage Amendment Order 2022 and the Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Amendment Order 2022. Madam Speaker, we must not lose sight of the fact that the orders we debate today will possibly impact the lives of some of the most vulnerable workers in our society. The impetus behind the introduction of the Minimum Wage Act in 1938 was the recognition of the need to protect certain categories of workers who did not possess the bargaining power to negotiate fair wages without the intervention of the legislature. The Act provides the legal framework for the institution of a minimum level of compensation which ensures that these workers are never placed in a position where their earnings are lower than an established standard. Section 3 of the Act authorizes the Minister of Labour to fix a minimum wage by ministerial order for any occupation in the island, either generally or in any specified area, for persons employed in certain occupations where the wages paid are considered to be unreasonably low. Madam Speaker, let me hasten to add that what is specified is merely a minimum standards guideline. And Madam Speaker, there isn't a Jamaican alive who would not agree that were we able to afford more, were the economy in a state where we could afford to raise the minimum wage even higher, there would be a tremendous support for that. How unfortunately, we are not in that position. And so where we hear of the suggestion that we must seek to achieve a minimum workable wage, affordable wage, the fact of the matter, Madam Speaker, there are few, and I dare say not even the great United States of America provides a minimum wage that equates to the livable wage. This means that the legislation does not preclude employers from paying wages in excess of the minimum wage, and in fact we encourage that. And I think it is rarely understood that that actually is the case. In fact, employers are encouraged, where possible, to pay their employees in accordance with their ability to pay, providing that the wages paid do not fall below the established standard. Several orders have been promulgated in response to Section 3 of the Act. However, throughout the years, the number of orders used to set a minimum wage has decreased as more wage earners access union representation. Practically two main orders are still utilized today. The National Minimum Wage Order 1975, which sets out the wage rate of all sectors, including household workers, and the Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Order 1982, which establishes a minimum wage for persons employed as industrial security guards. The term industrial security guards is used to identify security personnel engaged to companies which provide security services. These workers still fall within the protective ambit of minimum wage legislation because it is perceived vulnerable to exploitation in relation to the wages that are paid to them. Madam Speaker, we should all work towards a day when there will be no need to establish minimum wage orders to fix wages, because of all workers in Jamaica will have the bargaining power to negotiate their own wages. The Minimum Wage Act stipulates the utilization of a consumer approach to the contemplation of any adjustment to the minimum wage. The Minimum Wage Advisory Commission was therefore established under the provisions of Section 4 of the Act to undertake the consultative process and to advise the Minister of Labour on all issues germane to the minimum wage. This includes power to review the minimum wage levels set by the Minister and to make recommendations to the Minister for any amendments which it deems necessary. Over the past 2 years, the Commission conducted consultations with a variety of interest groups representing the 14 parishes in Jamaica, as well as key stakeholder organizations, including the Planning Institute of Jamaica, the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions, the Jamaica Employers Federation, and the Jamaica Society for Industrial Security. Madam Speaker, permit me to use this opportunity to commend the Commission and the staff of the Ministry of Labour and Social Security for an outstanding job in completing this review. The diligence with which they carried out their mandate has enabled us to make an informed decision with respect to the adjustments which were to be made to the national minimum wages and the minimum wage for industrial security guards. In recommending a minimum wage, the Commission considered factors such as the current state of the Jamaican economy, especially in light of the impact of the pandemic, employers' ability to pay, the continuing increase in the prices of goods and fuels and the cost of utilities and transportation, the rate of inflation, and the progress of the Jamaican economy recovery program. As Portfolio Minister, it is my responsibility to not only balance the interests of employers and minimum wage earners, but also to protect the employment opportunities of low-income earners. Madam Speaker, it must be noted that the employers of the minimum wage earners are not just large corporations. A minimum wage employer may be a private or public sector employee who, like the minimum wage earner, might also be struggling financially. In determining the wage to be paid to these workers, I am compelled to perform a delicate balancing act. Madam Speaker, having considered all these factors and reviewed the report of the Minimum Wage Advisory Commission, I hereby ask this Honourable House to confirm the following increases which were approved by Cabinet on February 21st, 2022. The proposed increases are to become effective, as was said earlier, on April the 1st, 2022. The national minimum wage, therefore, is to be increased from $7,000 to $9,000 per 40-hour work week, or from $175 to $225 per hour. The minimum wage for industrial security guards to be increased from $9,700 to $10,500 per 40-hour work week, or from $242.50 to $262.50 per hour. Laundry allowance for industrial security guards to be increased from $44 per hour to $47.62 per hour. Firearm premium allowance payable to industrial security guards to be increased from $48 per hour to $51.95 per hour. Dog handlers premium allowance payable to industrial security guards to be increased from $33 per hour to $35.72 per hour. The cost of insurance coverage to employers payable on account of industrial security guards who are killed or injured in the line of duty to be increased from $2,750,000 to $2,976,000. Madam Speaker, I now seek the affirmation and the resolution of this Honourable House in relation to the National Minimum Wage Amendment Order 2022 and the Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Amendment Order 2022. Thank you very much, Madam.
Madam Speaker, the question I would ask the Minister is really more on from a process perspective in determining the adjustments to the minimum wage and whether we actually have an annual process, or you could indicate how often that assessment is done, and whether the advisory committee, the minimum wage advisory committee, has at its disposal the services of an economist who does the assessment, looking at the movements in prices, etc. I know they do consultations, but whether they have that technical expertise available to them in making those determinations.
Thank you very much, Member. A very good question. The fact of the matter is we had discussions when this report was presented, and it was clear that an extended period of time had elapsed between the last time that the minimum wage was increased to when it was brought to the House. We decided that that could never be allowed to continue as a practice. So, based on the recommendations of the Commission and the involvement of the Commission and the expanded role that the Commission will have to play in determining exactly what constitutes or ought to constitute the minimum wage and the procedures leading to it, we have sought to ensure that the support mechanism to give them the support that they need to come up with the minimum wage every year has been put in place, and we will be assuring this House that never again will we have to wait this length of time to be told of the minimum wage. So it will be, the objective is to have it published each year. So the work starts almost immediately. In fact, the work preceded my presentation here, the work for the next minimum wage in studying the issues. And with respect to the in-house or the support that they will get from trained economists and people who are really au fait with this kind of procedure that is required, that is well advanced to shore up what we already have. And we have expanded the committee, and the Commission will be will be in full speed, I would imagine, within the month, but they will be working proactively to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Just for clarity, so we would get on an annual basis a report from the Commission tabled here, and you would then, or whoever is in that seat, would make a determination about whether you're acting on the recommendations or not. But the report would be brought here on an annual basis.
Yeah, that is my commitment.
Minister, you mentioned the expanded role for the Commission. Is that simply in terms of size or the nature of the mandate to the Commission? For example, is the Commission now in its work to embrace not just a minimum wage, but a livable wage?
A livable wage is challenging to commit the government to being able to give everyone a minimum wage bar that satisfies what is considered a livable wage. And as I indicated, not even the United States is able to do that. Because there are variations, there are differences in lifestyle, there are a number of factors to be taken into consideration. But perhaps most important, in considering the minimum wage, the approach we have adopted, as have many countries in the world, is to allow this as a minimum standard on which employers can act in providing additional sums of money based on the value that they place on the service being produced by the worker. That has been working quite well, and I get a sense that the employing community is more sensitized to the needs of our workers. But in arriving at that minimum wage, as I indicated, the Commission takes into consideration, first of all, the impact that the pandemic had on the economy. It took into consideration the employer's ability to pay, because we don't want to put a minimum wage at the level where the employer then questions whether they need so many workers. And then you have a reduction in employment, creating a much greater problem. And then you have the increase of prices, food prices, which that is a dynamic process at the moment, as you can realize across the world. Our largest trading partner is suffering from a serious price increase in basic food items, for instance, right as we speak. And we are governed, by and large, by those increases, considering that most of the input that go into our goods are not locally procured, locally grown, locally produced. So we are dependent on imports, which if you have a moving target, then you have to adjust accordingly. And so we will be studying that very carefully, so that when the minimum wage is recommended, it's against that background that we make that recommendation. The rate of inflation, which is tied to that, indirectly connected. So all those items that are taken into consideration will continue to be taken into consideration, but with the benefit of increased advice from those who are highly skilled in determining the type of levels that should be recommended.
Madam Speaker, it is clear the member has put forward both resolutions, and I invite you, therefore, to conclude the proceedings.
Member, probably I could ask you, since there are no contributions, to close the debate, Minister. No, Minister Samuda, he closed it. I beg your pardon, as distracted. Members, the question is that the resolutions brought by the minister be approved. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, we will now have the reports from the Regulations Committee.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
I didn't know about that.
Madam Speaker, the following regulations were referred to the House Regulation Committee on the 10th of February 2022. The Radio and Telegraph Control Citizen Band Radio Service Amendment Regulation 2022. The Radio and Telegraph Control Maritime Mobile Radio Service Amendment Regulation 2022. The Radio and Telegraph Control Private Radio Service Amendment Regulations 2022. The Radio and Telegraph Control Amateur Radio Service Amendment Regulation 2022. The Radio and Telegraph Control Radio Operators and Technician Amendment Regulation 2022. Madam Speaker, the committee met on the 15th day of February 2022 to consider and report all 5 regulations. The committee heard representative of the ministry and the related agency, and I will now outline the significant amendments that were proposed in the regulations. 1. Citizen Band Radio Service and Amateur Regulation Service Radio Service Regulations. The license tenure was increased from 1 to 5 years. It was determined that given the value of these licenses, the purpose for which they were used, and the regulatory effort involved in the issuing and an annual license, it would be more efficient to grant a longer validity report. B. Maritime Mobile Radio Service Regulation. 2. New periods of validity, 6 months and 4 years, were added in relation to international ships. In this regard, it is noted that applications on behalf of the international ships are made through the Jamaica, on behalf of the international ships, made through Jamaica Ship Registry, which is administered by the Maritime Authority of Jamaica, MAJ. The MAJ, pursuant to the Shipping Act, requires provisional registration of ship and thereafter permanent registration. As a result of this tenure of spectrum license for those vessels have been tailored accordingly for administrative ease. C. Private Radio Service Regulation. The principal regulations only provided for the issuance of annual licenses. However, this has proven to be very restrictive, as in some instances it impedes efficient regulation of the spectrum. Therefore, the amendments provide for additional period of validity to include 5, 10, and 15 years to cater to all the category of services which are captured under the heading of private radio service, in particular licenses for backhaul spectrum which supports mobile services. As a result of this new period of validity, it was also necessary to make amendments to reflect that the fees for a license, with the exception of a 3-month license, are payable annually regardless of the duration of the license. Lastly, fees were amended as follows. New fees or algorithms were included for services which did not exist at the time of the principal regulation were enacted, such as to exist at the time the principal regulation were enacted as lower power FM broadcasting, mobile subscriber, TV services, and duplex peer. Point to multi-point links and fees were decreased for some service categories which, due to the evolution of technology utilize the spectrum more efficiently and are smaller portions of the spectrum. Mandatory penalties and custodial sentences were increased in relation to all the regulations. These increases were determined having considered other recent legislative amendments treating with similar subject matters such as failure to hold a license and breach of the secrecy obligations, and the overall objective of deterring unauthorized use of the spectrum. The offences addressed relate to the use of the spectrum without a valid license, failing to produce a valid license upon request, and failing to comply with the obligation of the secrecy in relation to a license. Additionally, the fine in the catch-all provision treating with breaches which were not specifically penalized under the regulations were increased. After careful examination, Madam Speaker, the committee had no objection in any of the 5 regulations tabled. Accordingly, I ask that the 5 reports regarding these regulations be approved by this Honourable House.
Members, the question before the House is that the resolution be approved. Those in favour? Those against? The resolution is approved.
Madam Speaker, the next matter on public business is the conclusion of the debate on the Appropriations Act. And the Speaker today will be the Minister of Finance and member for Northwest St. Andrew, Dr. the Honourable Nigel Clarke. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I rise this afternoon to close the budget debate on the appropriation bill for the 2022-23 fiscal year. This is the 60th budget debate in Jamaica's independent history. And Madam Speaker, we honor and salute all of the leaders who came before us, who fought for our freedom, who established these noble institutions and who helped build our country while steadfastly and faithfully adhering to the tenets and principles of our Constitution. The process, Madam Speaker, of transparently laying before the people's representatives the fiscal plans and programs for the year and the means of financing them forms a cornerstone of our democratic order. We therefore approach this process with tremendous humility and respect for all those who came before us and who have paved the way. Indeed, Madam Speaker, we stand collectively on the shoulders of giants. Madam Speaker, we thank the presenters in the debate for their robust presentations, even when a little misguided. We thank the Prime Minister for his masterful presentation last Thursday. The Prime Minister delivered some good news that I think we all appreciate, and our constituents in particular all appreciate, Madam Speaker. And he continues to provide steady and calm leadership, particularly during a time of crisis, and he continues to provide hope for millions. We thank the opposition leader for his pretty presentation. Lots of graphic designers up at OLO. Whole heap of graphic designers. But I don't like to talk, he huffed and he puffed with a message of doom and gloom, but sadly butchering figures along the way. We also thank the opposition spokesman on finance for his presentation. Anybody notice that this year he came with some more accurate consumer affairs data? Right? So he's responsible for saving me a few pages today. Thank you, Madam Speaker. You have been doing an excellent job in maintaining the order in these proceedings. And thanks to the parliamentary staff, the clerk, the deputy clerk, the marshals, the stenographers, the interpreters, the sign language interpreters, and all who work at the House of Parliament for your dedication and professionalism. Thanks to the Financial Secretary and the team at the Ministry of Finance, who are among the finest in this region, and indeed among the finest anywhere in the world. And thanks to my security detail and driver, members of the media, and thanks to the listening public for tuning in. A special word of thanks, Madam Speaker, to those in the diaspora and those following on social media, on Instagram, on YouTube, or on Facebook or on Twitter. Thank you for your participation and your interest. And of course, Madam Speaker, I again express thanks to my family for their loving support. Madam Speaker, the budget debate opened with an overview of the progress with Jamaica's economic recovery from where we are coming. And Madam Speaker, we're very pleased that the Jamaican economy has rebounded with momentum from the depths of the pandemic-induced contraction. We're pleased that we're among the leaders in the Caribbean with the pace and magnitude of our economic growth coming out of the pandemic. And we're pleased that we're likely to be among the first in the region to attain pre-COVID levels of economic output. And Madam Speaker, most of all, we're pleased that 100,000 jobs have been restored. We're pleased, Madam Speaker, that we're fiscally sustainable and our debt ratio is again on a downward trajectory after the significant increases in 2020, 2021. Let us never take this ongoing economic recovery for granted, nor sacrifice the discipline that is required to maintain it. Madam Speaker, I showed this chart in my opening presentation, where Jamaica's per capita income is lower today in real terms than 50 years ago, which happens to be 1972. Madam Speaker, I'm a humble student of Jamaica's economic history, which is flush with very valuable lessons that can teach as much as, or even more than, the textbook. Because we have all the case studies right here. When you go to graduate school, they teach you by using case studies of what actually occurred in other countries around the world. And those case studies are mostly from the developed world. Here, right here in Jamaica, we have an abundance of historical economic data, an array of policy approaches. We also know the initial conditions as well as the outcomes. It is a goldmine that we must have the courage and the maturity to leverage. So when I reference the IMF's 2021 Article 4 consultation on Jamaica, which was published just last month in February of 2022, and I quote the very first paragraph that states that Jamaica's real per capita GDP is 20% lower in 2022 than it was 50 years ago in 1972. I'm not just sharing data, Madam Speaker. I'm sharing the central economic lessons which are relevant to our times. Across those 50 years, some of the economic lessons that are manifest include that unsustainable economic policies, even in the pursuit of noble causes, leads to financial ruin. Furthermore, it's the poor and vulnerable who are adversely affected from macroeconomic instability. Another lesson is that fiscal, balance of payments, and banking crises are terribly expensive and can take a generation to resolve. Another is that Jamaica has been frequently affected by crises of external origin, commodity price shocks, geopolitical tensions, natural disasters. These have in the past precipitated fiscal and balance of payments crisis and complicated recoveries, and that have frustrated and hampered and delayed our ability to get back on track. Madam Speaker, one of the central lessons of the last 50 years is that our development is best assured through steady progress, rather than 2 steps forward, 3 steps back that has characterized much of the last 50 years. Our small size, our open economy, and our geographical location make us vulnerable to economic shocks, which can have dislocating effects. To avoid the 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, we must prioritize economic resilience, which allows us to bounce back quickly from economic shock. I am sure there are other lessons too, but those are the ones, Madam Speaker, that speak most loudly to me. Madam Speaker, over the next 50 years, we should commit ourselves to the kind of policy approach where the Jamaican economy increases in size by 10 times in real terms over the next 50 years. That should be our ambition. And that can happen, Madam Speaker, provided that we consistently make sustainable policy choices, come rain or shine, and we share the benefits, and we compound our gains steadily over time. Now, Madam Speaker, there's a few words on the banknotes which featured prominently, and I've heard genuine questions as to why now, why spend the money to upgrade our banknotes now. And I provided some of the answers in my opening budget presentation, but I spoke quickly. Let me just recap very briefly. The Bank of Jamaica, in its independent view and without prompting, wrote to me about the need to upgrade Jamaica's banknotes. When the BOJ makes technically sound recommendations to the Minister of Finance on challenges with banknotes, it is advice that the Minister ought to take seriously. The problems the BOJ cited in its memo to me were the higher than necessary cost of producing the existing suite of notes, the higher than tolerable incidence of counterfeiting of existing notes, the challenges of the visually impaired with distinguishing between and among notes, and fourthly, the BOJ's independent assessment that Jamaica needs a $2,000 denomination among its banknotes. The latter may seem convenient. However, the BOJ's independent and unprompted, may I add, unprompted technical assessment demonstrated the need for a $2,000 note. The $5,000 note is the least used of our notes. While it is appreciated among the professionals and maybe among people in this room, it's kind of rejected at the street level. Because for the corner shop and for the taxi man, it consumes too much change if there's nothing between the $1,000 bill and the $5,000. The introduction of a $2,000 note will offer the consumer and the corner shop greater flexibility. And a very important point, Madam Speaker, is that it will allow for some more reduction in costs. We print a lot of $1,000 notes, but the $2,000 note and the $1,000 note will be a cost about the same to print, but we will need much fewer of both combined. I think everybody can see that. So we will lower our cost overall. We therefore accepted the BOJ's technical advice to upgrade the suite of banknotes using the latest advances in material science to produce notes that can last twice as long in some cases and to leverage the latest security features for banknotes. And we had to place images on back on the front. Now, very importantly, Madam Speaker, there's been no policy change with respect to what category of persons should appear on our banknotes. The existing policy, which existed long before my time, and if we want to change, we can, but it's a process of changing policy. It existed long before my time, is that national heroes and deceased prime ministers and premiers appear on Jamaica's banknotes. And that policy has long been on the Bank of Jamaica's website, ever since it had a website. Okay? That is the policy. And neither has there been a change in the images of Jamaica, the Dunsborough Falls, or the images of the children, or the primary school. The same images that are on our banknotes today and on banknotes that are out of circulation are the same images for which we have permission that we are reusing. Now, if we had taken the path suggested by the leader of the opposition in his budget presentation by placing Edward Siaga on one banknote and Michael Manley on another, as the Prime Minister mentioned, that was something that was indeed considered. But without any peering, what would have happened, Madam Speaker, is that there would have been no place for Marcus Garvey. There would have been no place for Paul Bogle. There would have been no place for George William Gordon. Madam Speaker, who are all our national heroes. In that sense, Madam Speaker, I consider, with respect, his view to be short-sighted. Madam Speaker, because of his view, it would mean that some of our national heroes would continue to be excluded from banknotes. Now, Madam Speaker, when you review the 1866 Commission of Inquiry report into the Morant Bay Rebellion, Madam Speaker, which I've had a personal copy of for a very long time. It's several volumes. This is just one volume of the original Commission of Inquiry report into the 1866 Morant Bay Rebellion. 1865, but it's produced in 1866, right? Yes, thank you. Madam Speaker, when you go through the thousands of pages of testimony and evidence from those who are affected and afflicted, the pages and pages that describe, Madam Speaker, the lashes, the brutality, the numbers who perished at the gallows, Madam Speaker, for daring to dream that we could be a people worthy of respect and worthy of freedom, Madam Speaker. Paul Bogle and George William Gordon, who lost their lives, should permanently be on our banknote, Madam Speaker. And I will not, Madam Speaker, contribute to a process where that is not the case. Madam Speaker, there would be no us without them. And we are proud, Madam Speaker, to restore the right excellent Paul Bogle and the right excellent George William Gordon to our banknotes. When you consider that Marcus Garvey and his legacy, his influence on our consciousness, his influence on civil rights, he's not only an important figure, Madam Speaker, of our past, he's an important figure for our future, Madam Speaker, and he belongs by himself on our banknotes. Madam Speaker, we're proud to restore Right Honourable, Right Excellent Norman Washington Manley and Right Excellent Sir Alexander Bustamante, founding fathers, to be on our banknotes. And the only way we could restore would be for more than one image to appear in a banknote. So the suggestion that those two leaders occupy separate notes is inconsistent with having our national heroes represented on our banknotes, Madam Speaker. It's a habit of trying to make choice without considering consequence, which is too often a feature of opposition politics. Madam Speaker, with respect to the co-location of Michael Manley and Edward Seaga, all I'll add to what I've already said is that the unique legacies and contributions of Michael Manley and Edward Seaga cannot be contained or limited or influenced by their joint placement on a note. They stand tall in the annals of Jamaican history. And therefore, our reaction to their placement is not about them. It says something about us. So if you're upset, Madam Speaker, I humbly ask on either side that this is not about you. This is not about you. This is about the young people, the young Jamaicans who are Jamaica's future. We desire that they grow up not perpetuating hate and division. And this is about symbolizing the unity and the political maturity we wish to see in our society. Madam Speaker, in the midst of what is an incredible economic recovery in the context of the pandemic and in the context of a historic economic setback, the opposition, as usual, presented a picture of doom and gloom. Their approach was to simply fit into a mold of what oppositions are expected to do, focused on a partisan approach. Sadly, Madam Speaker, the opposition relied on a few well-worn tactics, like raising the alarm about global developments with local effects, such as inflation and oil prices, as if I didn't open my presentation acknowledging the harshness of those circumstances. Their analysis was also one-sided, and as I will discuss later, omitted critical variables in their assessment, which led to false conclusions and worse, misguided recommendations. Second, Madam Speaker, their analysis in one particularly egregious case was based on incomplete, faulty, inaccurate data presented to the Jamaican people as if the Jamaican people cannot reason on their own. Third, and most problematic, Madam Speaker, they put forward a number of proposals that are unsustainable, unworkable, and, Madam Speaker, from the perspective of what they know, grossly irresponsible. Proposals, Madam Speaker, that would put Jamaica 3 steps back when we are moving forward. And they made these proposals with a straight face, without blushing. Madam Speaker, in my opening presentation, I shared and acknowledged the challenges caused by post-COVID global inflation, and most recently, the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The opposition engaged in repetition of the same observations, as they're obviously required to do. But mentioning it as if there were some inspired revelations, as if we don't all read the news and watch the cable on TV. And they presented them in the manner of presentation, almost as if those global developments were our fault. Madam, the opposition suggested that inflation assumptions are lower than is likely to be experienced. I agree. I said so in the Standing Finance Committee, and I expounded on this in my opening budget presentation. How much higher could inflation be? This is average inflation for the entire year. Based on data available today, it could be 1 point, 2 points higher for the full fiscal year average over 12 months. One cannot be 100% sure. It depends on how global developments unfold. But updating key macroeconomic variables in response to global developments is to be expected. That happens everywhere in the world quite frequently. Just 6 days ago, the Federal Reserve updated their forecast for the U.S. economy for this fiscal year. So coming here, Madam Speaker, and presenting that outcomes may be slightly different in terms of some of these variables is not special or in any way unique. And a 1 or 2 point variation, Madam Speaker, does not require a recasting of a budget. Absolutely not. If that were the case, we would be recasting budgets all the time. Budgets are not crystal balls. There are projections based on the best available information at the time that they're put together. In the past several years, it has been normal for inflation to land within a 2 point band of the expectation. The omission, Madam Speaker, however, that permeated the opposition's arguments, Madam Speaker, is that inflation affects both revenues and expenditure. The opposition conveniently focused on inflation's impact on revenues, and they mentioned debt service, but surprisingly ignored the fact that inflation affects government expenditures too. So their argument, Madam Speaker, is somehow inflation, therefore government is going to be with resources, etc. That doesn't follow. The government of Jamaica is the largest procurer of goods and services in the economy. Where there's inflation, the government expenditures goes up. And inflation outcomes exceeding budgetary outcomes doesn't provide a windfall, as they want to suggest. What provides a windfall? The only thing that provides a windfall is real economic growth, Madam Speaker. When you have real economic growth, revenues increase without a commensurate increase of expenditure. And again, we know this for our own economic history. If, Madam Speaker, inflation caused a windfall, then we wouldn't have had a fiscal challenge in the 1990s and 2000s. We wouldn't. We would just depend on the windfall. You see the logic? We just depend on the windfall. Madam Speaker, if inflation caused a windfall, the government of the day would not have gone years, even a decade, without paying statutory deductions on behalf of government workers. If inflation caused a windfall. If inflation caused a windfall, Madam Speaker, my friend, the former Minister Honorable Peter Phillips would not have had the unenviable task of writing off hundreds of billions of uncollected taxes owed by government ministries, departments, and agencies if inflation caused a windfall. With all respect and humility, Madam Speaker, those fallacious impressions and arguments have to be rejected outright. Let's have a debate based on sound arguments, not based on those kind of assertions. Knowing our economic history is important, and from our history, we know that no government, including this government, derives a net benefit fiscally from high inflation. They may be confused in what happened last year when we experienced a sharp growth in revenues that was mostly due to the high levels of economic growth that we experienced last year, the highest growth since 1988. Now, let me address a structural issue, Madam Speaker. As part of our reforms, the government of Jamaica tables the budget 6 weeks before the opening budget presentation. So the budget goes to Cabinet 8 weeks, which is 2 months, before the opening budget presentation. Overall, that's a good thing. It means that the level of planning involved and the organization required is much greater and much better than was the case decades ago. Let us not make this structural reform that we have put in place over the last 10 years into a bad thing. It does have the downside, Madam Speaker, that 2 months is a long time, especially for a small, vulnerable, open economy that can easily be affected by global developments. In most years, nothing will happen in those 2 months to have an impact. But in some years, conditions do change. But if that happens, Madam Speaker, we deal with it. The value of the structural reform is that we now have a fixed timetable over a period of 2 months that allows for greater transparency, planning, and interrogation of the budget, and it allows us to start the new fiscal year organized. But, Madam Speaker, it's a bit disingenuous, and it's the second time they're doing it, to argue that global developments in March should be incorporated 2 months earlier in January, when the budget is considered by Cabinet. Madam Speaker, the best practice in public financial management is you don't speculate in the budgetary process. Today we can speculate about it. You don't speculate. The budgetary process is not about speculation. The best practice around the world is that you use the best available information, hard information, not speculation, not possibilities, at the time, while retaining the ability to incorporate future information, if material, at a later stage. So, Madam Speaker, this business here that they have been engaged in is again trying to fool up the Jamaican people. Yes. Not recognizing that Jamaican people are listening and watching, and they can reason and think for themselves. Now, the opposition, Madam Speaker, seems a little rattled by the fact that the government has established an unmatched record of 7 consecutive years of no net new taxes, and 5 consecutive years of no new taxes at all. The evening crisis, and a broad array of givebacks to the Jamaican people. We gave back the personal income tax. We abolished the wicked small business, the asset tax on small business. We abolished the hated minimum business tax that stifled micro business. We abolished ad valorem distortionary stamp duty. For the first time, small companies, Madam Speaker, their first dollar of profit they have to pay tax on. They can earn up to 1.5 million without paying any tax on it. This government put that in place. And we are the only government to date to ever lower the standard rate of GCT across all goods to which it applies. This, Madam Speaker, is an unmatched record. And the people of Jamaica, therefore, know that when it is feasible, where it is sustainable, and where it can be afforded, this government will give back to the Jamaican people. And, Madam Speaker, they have been in power for 8 plus 18, that's 26, plus 4, am I right? 30 years, Madam Speaker, and have never once ever presided over a net tax give back to the Jamaican people. It's an orientation, Madam Speaker. It's a way of thinking. Yeah? So because of that, the opposition leader go and play the spin ball and was caught by everybody on the offside at Silly Point. Because quite incredulously, he would want you, the Jamaican people, to believe that revenues rising by 99 billion, by the way, there's a big error with that number, but revenues rising by a certain amount is the same thing as your taxes going up by that amount. Imagine the gall, imagine the nerve to try and fool people to thinking that. Firstly, on a point of correction, Madam Speaker, tax revenues are projected to grow by 65 billion in 22-23 and not 99 billion, as erroneously and inaccurately claimed by the opposition leader. And I'll turn to this a little later. He has been all over town with the wrong figure and wrong by a big amount on a crucially important variable, misinforming the Jamaican people, strong and wrong. Them not ready, Madam Speaker. Them not ready at all. Them not ready. I mean, what can I say? He uses an inaccurate figure and engages in wrong analysis and therefore ends up with wrong solutions. And beyond that, him take Jamaican people for fool, expecting them to be confused, to confuse revenue growth with tax increase. I have a word for you. The Jamaican people are much smarter for fall for that nonsense. No, listen to the opposition's logic now. If you apply opposition's logic, when the government revenue fell, and everybody saw that, by $75 billion in 2020, as compared to 2019, due to the pandemic, it must, according to opposition, it must have been because we reduced taxation by 75 billion. You see the ridiculousness of his logic?
It's a good time, Madam Speaker, it's a good time as we pause to see the ridiculousness of the logic. Madam Speaker, just to allow it to sink in that it's a good time to pause to see the illogical nature of the logic. Madam Speaker, the member's time, I move be extended sufficiently to allow him to complete his presentation. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
So, Madam Speaker, opposition leader come with good logic, you know. Last year, Julian come with bogus price, right? This year, I'm doing a little better. I'm not tackling him on that because him come with decent data. Well, you can't come here and take the Jamaican people for fool and believe that we're not going to talk about it. It is the height of cynicism, Madam Speaker, and disrespect to believe that you can have the Jamaican people confuse revenue growth with tax increase. So, here's the thing now, right? We have experienced record economic growth this year from historic contraction and economic activities flourishing. And revenue growth is associated with a growth in economic activity. This is not a result of you being taxed more. I mean, let's look at an example. In 2020, tourist arrivals unfortunately plummeted, right? And as such, departure tax sank all the way down to, still was 5 billion though, but that was down from a high. Right. This fiscal year, in 21-22, departure tax revenue is projected to end the year at $15 billion, 200% increase. Now, that increase is not because you are taxed more. It's not because departure tax has gone up. It's because there are more flight departures from Jamaica. And thank God for that. When you look across all categories of revenue, that is a phenomenon being observed. More economic activity leads to more revenue generation and collection for the government. And that, as I said before, is a good thing. It may be confounding for the opposition, as we haven't experienced this kind of expansion and this pace of recovery since the recovery from Hurricane Gilbert in 1988-89. But importantly, what it shows is that the government can increase its revenues by structuring taxes more efficiently, as direct and indirect achieve, and then even lowering the indirect tax for everyone. A fine example of how taxes can actually decrease. So the expected 65 billion rise in revenues, not 99 billion, isn't because taxes are up. It is because the economy is up. You see, the opposition can't fool any Jamaican with their claim, because the Jamaican people know what tax increases look like. Madam Speaker, the first thing with a tax increase is that the minister comes and lays a paper like this in the House. All right? Back in the day, and this can have both increases or decreases, right? But revenue measures are in these pink documents, a ministry paper. And back in the day, when you see these pink documents, you start fret. You say, Lord God, what they're coming with now? New taxes and new increases on taxes called revenue measures covered, Madam Speaker, between 9 and 19 pages in length in the 1990s and 2000s. And I'm going through this because history is important so we can appreciate, we don't lose what we have. All right, I'll give you an example, Madam Speaker. In 1995-96, and this is a reprint of electronic files. I don't have the original pink version. In 1999-96, Madam Speaker, there are 15 pages of new taxes. This is what revenue measures look like. Okay? Don't make Mark Golden try to fool you. This is it. 16 pages of tax increases in 1995-96. In 1996-97, Madam Speaker, 15 pages of tax increases. 15. Count them, right? They're all here, printed, two sides. 15 pages. In 1998-99, can you imagine, Madam Speaker, 19 pages. 19 pages, printed double side of tax increases, all right? That is what revenue measures look like, Madam Speaker. When we come here and we say no new tax, we mean no new tax. This is tax, this is what it looks like. And that is just to give you a sample. So, Madam Speaker, I have a question for the opposition leader. I want to ask him, where the page them there, Marky G? Where them there? The fact is that for 16 years prior to 2016, governments levied $100 billion of taxes on the backs of the Jamaican people, representing a cumulative amount of 14% of GDP. $100 billion is closer to the opposition's erroneous 99 billion figure, but it seems more fitting. They gave us, well. So, Madam Speaker, the opposition misses the point. They miss the point. The reason why we celebrate the fact that we have had 7 years of no net new tax increases and 5 years of new tax increases is because of our history. It's not because of any other reason. It is because of the history that the Jamaican people have gone through, where year after year after year, Madam Speaker, tax upon tax upon tax every single year. It was like a tyrannical experience for the Jamaican people, and we don't want to go back there. We don't want to go back there. So, Madam Speaker, I'd say to the opposition and opposition leader, don't try to fool the Jamaican people. Come with good arguments, we'll engage you. But don't come with any foo-foo argument, try to trick people. Revenues are growing, Madam Speaker, because the economy is growing. Now, let's put inflation and taxes together. Again, I don't have a case of them generally not understanding or cynically. They advance another false argument that it is because of inflation why we don't have to increase taxes. So let's deal with that one. And I've shared already in small snippets why that is so grossly wrong. A high school student in economics knows that inflation increases expenses as well as revenues. And on a net basis, the government is often worse off. The opposition can't just look at one variable. Because if inflation explains no new taxes, then you have to tell me why then, in the highest inflation year in 1991-92, did we have 7 full pages of tax increases? We can pick many years. If inflation explained no new taxes, why in 2005, when inflation was 12%, we had tax increases of 14 billion or 2.2% of GDP? Madam Speaker, the argument is just simply irresponsibly wrong. And the Jamaican people, Madam Speaker, can conclude that them not ready. Them not ready. The contrary is in fact the case, that high inflation often leads to higher taxation as the government tries to raise revenue to keep up with spending needs. The impact of inflation over time can lead to business failures and unemployment that reduce revenues. So higher revenues doesn't mean higher taxes, as I just described. And our history shows that high inflation is often synonymous with higher taxation, not the reverse. So, Madam Speaker, our approach is based on the confidence, our confidence in the capacity of the Jamaican people, their capacity to understand, their capacity to discern, their capacity to reason. And we empower the Jamaican people with knowledge and information, even technical information. And we commit to always telling you as it is. Now, the opposition spokesman on finance asked a question about the difference between Petrojam's average price, as seen in the public body estimates, and the Ministry of Finance's price in the fiscal policy paper. And these are average prices that both government bodies project over the 12 months of the upcoming fiscal year. The public body estimate says that Petrojam's budget for the 2022-23 fiscal year projects average sale price of petroleum at $79 a barrel, where the fiscal policy paper has average oil prices at $67.5 a barrel, which the opposition spokesman alluded to. So the opposition spokesman makes much of the fact that the documents were tabled on the same day, the February 10th. So why the difference? Madam Speaker, the answer is simple. Numbers can be different if they measure different things. Numbers can be different if they measure different things. Building, Madam Speaker, impressions of doom and gloom and absolutely nothing. Petrojam sells refined product, and so this benchmark is the quote. The benchmark they use is the US Gulf reference price, which is a price for refined petroleum product. And they're used as reference in markets where there may be no market prices. So Petrojam, in their public body estimates, they're projecting their financials and their revenues and so forth, and they say, we project oil prices to be X. What they're talking about is the revenue side of refined product, and therefore they're using the US Gulf reference price. When it comes to the fiscal policy paper, we're concerned about the price of crude oil, which we import. Petrochem is a refinery. It takes crude oil and it makes refined product. It sometimes imports refined product as well. And in the fiscal policy paper, we're concerned about the price of crude oil, and so the reference is to the West Texas Intermediate Crude Oil Benchmark, which is one of the three main benchmarks in oil pricing, along with Brent, which we know about, and Dubai crude is another one. So the difference, Madam Speaker, between the two prices is the cost to refine the product. And the price differentials can arise because of temporary imbalances in the supply or demand of any one. So, Madam Speaker, numbers can be different if they measure different things. No need for alarm and doom and gloom. You should always expect a difference between those two benchmarks and those two numbers, because one is capturing refined product, the other is capturing the crude raw material. The opposition also advanced other arguments, Madam Speaker, based on the fallacy that the government of Jamaica has earned and is earning a windfall from taxes on fuel. And let me just take a few moments to deal with this. Because it's great that we have a democracy, freedom of speech, you can say anything. But when people in responsible positions say things that are misleading, it causes a problem. It causes a problem. And I have a duty. I wish I never had to spend half of my speech on stuff like this. But they've misled a great many people with this fallacy. Madam Speaker, their analysis is faulty and leads to incorrect conclusions and unwise policy proposals, as again, they only consider one variable, which is price. And they leave out the other variable, which is, that determines revenue, which is volume. It is these two variables acting together that influences the revenue inflow to the government, not price alone. So he stands up here and he says, hey, in the last fiscal policy paper, you said the average price was X. The average price turned out to be Y. Oh, you've earned all of this money, blah, 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 give it back. Utter rubbish and nonsense. Honestly, sorry, in all humility. Because to get revenue, you can't just look at price. You can't just look at price. High school economics know that. You have to look at the volume of the stuff that is coming in. Madam Speaker, for people who have ambitions to handle the affairs of the country, this represents either a worrying gap in their understanding or a serious omission in their analysis. Either way, it don't look good. Them not ready, Madam Speaker. Them not ready. Now, taxes on fuel are an integral part of government revenues. But overall revenues from fuel depend critically on the volume of fuel imported. Madam Speaker, the pace and momentum of Jamaica's economic recovery has been so strong that the opposition can be forgiven, they can really be forgiven, for forgetting that the overall economic activity is still lower than pre-pandemic levels. Right? So the facts, Madam Speaker, are that the volume of fuel imports to Jamaica declined considerably during the pandemic, considerably, and they have not yet recovered to pre-pandemic levels. And that is a simple fact, Madam Speaker. As a result, even with fuel prices where they are, at this stage, and I can't predict the future, but at this stage, the projections are still that in the fiscal year 2021-2022, the government will take in less in fuel taxes than we did in 2019-20 prior to the pandemic, unlike what they'd want you to believe. And when you factor in inflation over the 2 years since the pandemic, the government's tax revenues from fuel in 21-22 is substantially behind where it was in 2019-20 in real terms. Again, a simple fact. Now, the opposition spokesperson mentioned ad valorem tax, and again, I have to weigh in here. Because it is true that there's the ad valorem tax based on percentages, and there is a special consumption tax, which is a fixed price per litre. And he advanced the thing that, ad valorem tax, the percentage, is going through the roof. Well, because of how the ad valorem tax is applied and how the fixed taxes are applied, ad valorem makes up between 22% to 26% of overall fuel tax intake. And SCT represents the fixed portion represents about 74 to 78%. So, Madam Speaker, what can happen is that even if prices rise, the amount by which the ad valorem goes up is defeated by the amount by which the volumes go down. And that's exactly what happened. Not so simple, but that is exactly what happened. And so, Madam Speaker, I just want to remove from this notion that in this fiscal year there are any bumper revenues from fuel tax. That is not the case. So the analysis of the opposition spokesman, parroted by the opposition leader, of looking at the average price in the fiscal policy paper and the average price outcome is very faulty as a means of commenting on the impact on government revenues. Now, clearly, I mean no harm. But you gave faulty analysis to the country, repeated it in interviews, and that's a problem. And it is my job, Madam Speaker, to explain it, to correct it, and to explain it to the Jamaican people. You have to look at the average price through the year, yes, but also volume. And as of now, there are no bumper revenues from the fuel tax. Our revenues from the fuel tax are substantially below 2019, 2020 in real terms. Now, Madam Speaker, the opposition leader points to 3.5% growth projection and states that the government plans to collect 99 billion more in taxes in this coming year. I dealt with the fallacy of that and the cynical attempt to mislead the Jamaican people in the way that is phrased. And he used that to say we could afford a 40 billion social assistance program. Well, as I explained earlier, Madam Speaker, he made a $34 billion error, or a $34 billion misrepresentation, which shows you the attention to detail that's been employed going about your business. Because when you look at the table from the fiscal policy paper, which is here, Madam Speaker, you'll see very clearly, its table in the House is available for everyone to see, that the tax revenues changes between 22, 23, and I'll read it for you, and 21, 22, in 22, 23 is projected at 671 billion, and in 21, 22 it's projected at 606 billion. When I went to school, that difference, Madam Speaker, was $65 billion, not 99. And can you imagine that? Coming here and telling the Jamaican people that tax revenues are going to be up by 99 billion, and therefore you can afford this. When in fact, you're wrong by $34 billion. Madam Speaker, they're not ready yet. Not ready yet at all. So, having made that $34 billion error, Madam Speaker, they hope to finance that splurge that he referenced by an error. And the opposition will try to obfuscate, but you check it for yourself. Now, what are we doing? Revenues have increased by 65 billion on the back of economic growth and inflation. So what are we doing with that $65 billion tax revenue growth? Well, first of all, Madam Speaker, goods and services will cost more in the upcoming fiscal year than they cost this year. And room is made for that. Second, we're using considerable resources to begin the implementation of the public sector compensation restructuring, where we will restructure public sector compensation. We delayed this restructuring last year, and we will not agree to delaying it again, Madam Speaker, barring unforeseen circumstances. And third, we are increasing investment in capital expenditure to catalyze economic activity, boost productivity, and support jobs. So, Madam Speaker, last year the opposition spokesman on finance came and said we needed 20 billion more in expenditure to help the recovery along. You remember? We pointed to him that, look, it's going to not consistent with the program. And we maintain discipline, Madam Speaker, and the PIOJ is projecting growth far higher than we had projected and that he had ever believed possible based on his utterances. So after that experience, now you have the opposition leader not to be outdone by his finance spokesman. Not at all to be outdone. So he comes and he doubles what the finance spokesperson said last year. What are we to expect next year? 60 billion? 80 billion? Madam Speaker, the problematic element of the opposition proposal is that they didn't really spell out how to credibly achieve this. The expenditure envelope of the budget is crafted in accordance with Jamaica's fiscal rules, laid out in Section 48 of the Financial Administration and Audit Act. And these fiscal rules prescribe the envelope of expenditure for any given level of revenues by targeting a specific fiscal balance. And this fiscal balance is calculated to be consistent with our debt objective of 60% by 2027-2028. So the fiscal balance, Madam Speaker, use words to try and label, and that's what people do when, label when they can't mount arguments. Primary school tactics. The fiscal balance is not my fiscal balance, Madam Speaker, as he wants to make it out to be, that I am somehow pursuing a fiscally conservative path. The fiscal balance is not my balance. It is what the rules prescribe. Anyone in the role of Minister of Finance of Jamaica is required to abide by the Fiscal and Audit Administration Act and would be required to table a budget with the exact same fiscal balance. He makes much of the fact of pursuing a small fiscal surplus. That is where revenues cover expenditure with a small margin. And he attributes it to me personally. Madam Speaker, again, this is attempting to fool the Jamaican people. I am faithfully, Madam Speaker, following what is laid out in the Fiscal and Audit Administration Act. And if I didn't do that, Madam Speaker, the Auditor General would have reason to write me up and report it to my parliamentary colleagues. But you know the real irony of the situation, Madam Speaker? You know the real irony? These are fiscal rules that the opposition leader and myself, among several other senators at the time, helped to put in place. I was appointed to the Senate by then opposition leader Andrew Holness. And in opposition, I supported the then government's introduction of the amendments to the Fiscal and Audit Administration Act that strengthened Jamaica's fiscal rules. Mark Golding piloted those amendments in the Senate, and I supported him. So as Minister of Finance, I am abiding by the laws that he and I helped to put in place, and he seeks to label me for doing that. Now that's what you call an irony, but some people would even call it hypocrisy. You really think that Jamaican people can't reason, don't you? And Madam Speaker, we have the courage to be faithfully doing this without having the IMF watching over our shoulders, or without having the IMF to blame, or without having the IMF to use as cover. Madam Speaker, the opposition leader cannot, on one hand, claim the high ground of having helped to strengthen Jamaica's fiscal rules. Right? The fiscal rules were first implemented in 2010, by the way, when Audley Shaw was minister. But he can't claim the high ground of strengthening the fiscal rules. And then another, make a proposal, slow the pace of debt reduction, whatever you called it, that if applied, would imply an abandonment of them. Choose what you want. You can't occupy both positions. It is to the credit of former Prime Minister Portia Simpson Miller and former Minister Peter Phillips who greatly strengthened the fiscal rules first introduced by Prime Minister Bruce Golding and former Minister Audley Shaw. On behalf of Jamaican people, I beg you, let's not undo their collective legacy. Too many people work too hard and sacrifice too much for that. And their legacy only exists if we maintain the path and we create our own legacy by building on it, strengthening it, protecting it, Madam Speaker, not destroying it. You know, I once told Peter Phillips privately in this chamber, sidebar conversation, that his legacy on these matters, no, I'm saying what I said. I won't say what he said. What I said. I said to him, his legacy on these matters is safe with us. But based on the irresponsibility of some of the utterances from Mr. Golding, I'm not so sure we can conclude that his legacy is safe with him. Mikhail, tell him, his legacy is not safe with him.
Involved in their internal argument.
We have fought in the argument.
Why you get involved in their internal argument? Because you have just had it now a campaign slogan.
Madam Speaker,
I can imagine Lisa taking that slogan.
Madam Speaker, let's just remember a few things, man. And I'm really appealing to all members of the House, opposition, right? Madam Speaker, though we manage our debt ratios efficiently during the pandemic, Jamaica is still the 9th highest indebted country in the hemisphere. 9th highest out of 34. The average debt ratio in Latin America and the Caribbean, Madam Speaker, is 72%. We celebrate coming out to 95 because we've always been so high. But we don't realize how risky it is. And what it does is it makes us highly vulnerable. The problem with high debt, Madam Speaker, is that it intensifies the structural vulnerability of small size and an open economy and susceptibility to tropical cyclones. Those are structural vulnerabilities, Madam Speaker. They leave us susceptible to economic shocks that are exacerbated by high debt. And while those structural vulnerabilities, I call them structural because they can't easily change. We can't move where we are located geographically. We can, over a long period of time, address the openness. Hard to address the small size. That will take, you have to, you know. You sound like you have experience, but so, Madam Speaker, the structural vulnerabilities, right? We can't easily rid ourselves of. So we have to deal with the vulnerability that we can have some control over in the short term. The reason why I showed the graph to begin with, Madam Speaker, is that our history has been one of tossing from one crisis to another. That's made worse by this kind of vulnerability. And as government finances have improved from debt reduction, more capital has been available for the private sector to grow, and as a result, Madam Speaker, pre-pandemic, more Jamaicans were working than ever before. In addition, social spending has outstripped real GDP growth and inflation. That is, social spending has benefited disproportionately from the fiscal improvements that have accompanied this path. Capital expenditure has also outpaced nominal GDP growth. As I like to tell people, Madam Speaker, I never see a pothole in a gated community uptown. Never. The relative wealthy don't depend on government capital expenditure as much as our everyday Jamaicans. Improvement in our finances allows us to also, Madam Speaker, allows us to turn our attention to public sector restructuring, compensation-wise. Why risk all of this progress with a reversal in our fiscal rules? Madam Speaker, Jamaica gets a lot of credit that affects people's lives positively for faithfully adhering to these fiscal rules over the past 10 years. 10 years. 10 years in this form, in its strengthened form. And reducing our debt ratio across administrations, across finance ministers. And these rules are now interpreted as being institutionalized. It's very important that we keep it that way. Our debt is priced below peers who have the same metrics because there is belief in Jamaica's direction. And that lower pricing means that we have extra resources that we can deploy elsewhere. Now, when the pandemic came, it triggered the escape clause in our fiscal rules. If the escape clause conditions are met again, God forbid, then the rules allow for suspension. But otherwise, Madam Speaker, let us maintain the credibility of the fiscal regime that so many sacrifice for. Now, if we are to maintain the fiscally responsible path that Jamaica has been on now for nearly 10 years, it's actually 9 years, with much progress, the opposition leader would only be able to fund his proposal by either relocating expenditure or raising taxes. And he did not comment on either. And the reason why, Madam Speaker, opposition politics can get away with these kind of outlandish is because what they do is they play upon the complexity of government finances and on the belief that people can't understand them. So what I want to do, Madam Speaker, I want to break it down so that you understand the structure of Jamaica's expenditure. I want to bear with me for a second. So, Madam Speaker, I'm going back to my blocks. And I'm going to lay out for you the structure of Jamaica's expenditure. And I want to know where you're going to find the 40 billion from that. So, Madam Speaker, what I'm going to do, each of these blocks represent 40 billion, approximately, right? This block here is 3 times 40, 120. Now, because we're going to approximate where approximation is necessary to make the point. So wages and salaries, Madam Speaker, is approximately 280 billion, right? Which is 7, Madam Speaker, times 40 billion. Right? So this year, let's call this 120, 3 times 40, another 120, call that 240, and then let us add another 40 billion, 280 billion. So that, Madam Speaker, is what we spend on wages and salaries. Now, interest is approximately 130 odd billion. Now, that would normally take, that would be 3 blocks plus a little change. We're not going to bother with the change because we just want to make the point, right? So, interest we're going to represent, Madam Speaker, with 3 blocks. 40 billion, 80 billion, and this is 120 billion, approximately, right? So that's interest. So we have gone 120, we're going to call it plus 280, that's 400 billion. All right, it's really about 410, but we're approximating the 400. Then, Madam Speaker, we have pension for government workers. Pension for government workers is about $40 billion. Let's call that there. Now, on top of pension, Madam Speaker, the government spends approximately $80 billion in grants to public bodies and institutions. And let me tell you what some of those mean. Those are people like University Hospital of the West Indies, University of the West Indies, UTech, other colleges, early childhood institutions, Chase, UDC, JUTC, Jamaica Tourist Board, Tourism Enhancement Fund. All of these, Madam Speaker, doing valuable work and dependent on the government support. So that is where we have, that's 40 plus 40, approximately $80 billion. Now, Madam Speaker, we spend another $80 billion on goods and services, and those include drugs and medical supplies. We spend $20 billion, 21 to be exact, on drugs and medical supplies, maintenance for properties and buildings, machinery and fixtures, security services. The government too has to buy fuel and oil and spends a couple billion on that each year, and lubricants. Technology services, janitorial services, pest control, waste management, as well as rental costs. The government spends over $6 billion on rental each year. So when you put that together, Madam Speaker, this is what goods and services represent. All right? So let's remember, let's recap. So far, we have wages here in yellow. We have interest in red. Pension is a brown. Right? Pension is a brown. And then we have grants to public bodies and institutions, which is the white, and these are critical institutions. And then we have the procurement of goods and services that makes the operation of government work. And then, Madam Speaker, the last 120 billion approximately is an amalgamation of social assistance, utilities, and capital expenditure. And let's put them together because none of them was a integer multiple of 40. So it's combined, right? So social assistance, capex, and utilities. Utilities are about $7-8 billion a year. Capex about $65 billion a year. That's the structure of government expenditure. 18 blocks of 40 billion is 720. The expenditure in the budget is 740 because 20 billion of employers' contribution on payroll deductions I have not included here for ease of reference. So this is the structure, Madam Speaker. Wages, interest, pension, support to public institutions, goods and services, utilities, social assistance, and capex. I want the opposition leader, Madam Speaker, to tell me where he's going to find $40 billion from among these. Maybe, Madam Speaker, last year we should have implemented the compensation review and we have delayed it. But people have been waiting for a long time and we intend to carry it through. But this is serious business, Madam Speaker. We can't today in 2022, when we have all kind of communication devices available to us, we can't engage in this kind of sloppiness and come in with big, expensive proposals that cannot be financed. You show me where you're going to cut 40 billion from these expenses. The truth, Madam Speaker, is that that 40 billion, if you're going to maintain fiscal rules, cannot be financed through a reallocation of expenditure. The only way possible, Madam Speaker, is through increased taxes, which is their usual approach. No, Madam Speaker. The government has committed to spend $6.6 billion on digital, has committed to spend or has already spent $6.6 billion on digital devices for Jamaican students and teachers under the Ministry of Education various programs representing over 200,000 digital devices. And this exceeds by a factor of 6 what the government collects in GCT on those devices. And we believe, Madam Speaker, in delivering targeted support, and when we target, we go big, $6.6 billion. Madam Speaker, I like to try to find common ground with the opposition where that is possible. Sometimes they make it difficult. But we agree with the opposition spokesperson on finance that the addition of lithium batteries to the list of energy-efficient products to benefit from tax relief. And in fact, the cabinet submission in support of this went to cabinet even before I opened my budget presentation.
You're not agreeing with it.
No, Maria, we did it before. Yes, it was actually. Yeah. I was just being magnanimous, PM. But we. Madam Speaker, in keeping with the thrust of the National Energy Policy in 2009, the Ministry of Finance has been updating our policy framework to encourage the use of energy-efficient technologies. And from as early as 2013, the Ministry of Finance incentivized the use of selected energy-efficient technologies by suspending the common external tariff and granting general consumption tax exemption on the importation of such items. We recognize that lithium-ion batteries are rechargeable batteries and used as the primary component of its electrolyte. It's commonly used for portable electronics and electric vehicles, and their popularity has been growing as an energy storage technology, which should help to reduce the costs associated with generation of electricity. So, Madam Speaker, we are going to, the Ministry has sought and obtained Cabinet's approval to exempt lithium-ion batteries from GCT to be implemented in the first quarter of 2022-2023. Madam Speaker, the $750 million in social assistance that I announced in my budget presentation is expected to target 75,000 persons, Madam Speaker, across a mix of modalities. And in my opening presentation, I shared that the government at that time was making a $2 billion provision to provide targeted assistance to those who are most affected by the volatility in energy prices and the least able to respond. I added that further details would be disclosed in my closing presentation. Madam Speaker, there has been increased volatility in the price of oil as Western countries apply economic pressure on Russia. In addition to an unprecedented block of sanctions, the United States has also stopped purchasing Russian oil, and there are fears that other countries could follow, restricting the supply of oil on the world market. This caused concern, Madam Speaker, and a few weeks ago we saw oil prices establish a 10-year high, from which prices have since retreated, even though yesterday they went back up. However, oil prices remain elevated, and this is a source of unease. For one, prices of petroleum products for motor cars have increased, and electricity prices have also increased. Madam Speaker, in applying relief, we aim to be targeted in our approach. That is, as much as practically possible, direct the relief towards persons who have been and are most affected and who have the least ability to cushion it for themselves. We recognize, Madam Speaker, that everyone feels it, but government assistance should first go to assist those who are most vulnerable, who are in the lowest consumption deciles, and to those who need it most. Madam Speaker, the population of Jamaicans who depend on public transportation is substantial, and it is at least 3 times as large as the population fortunate enough to own their own motor vehicle. Madam Speaker, we need to protect those who depend on public transportation, and will do so by supporting public transport operators. The government of Jamaica, Madam Speaker, will provide $25,000 in vouchers to operators of public passenger vehicles, including route taxi operators and contract carriage operators, in recognition of the higher cost of fuel at this time. Madam Speaker, this program will cost just under $600 million. The voucher program will begin toward the latter half of April and will be administered by the Transport Authority under the guidance of the Minister of Transport and Mining, the Honourable Audley Shaw, who I'm sure will speak more fulsomely on this. In addition, Madam Speaker, the government will make available $200 million in revolving loan financing for public passenger vehicle operators, which will be available through microcredit and approved financial institutions by way of the DBJ. This financing will be available for short-term loans for tires, batteries, and spare parts required for public transportation operations. And as we provide, Madam Speaker, some relief, we appeal to public transportation operators to abide by the fares set by regulatory authorities. Madam Speaker, in addition, we will increase the allocation towards transportation assistance for students on path by 40%. This will cost an additional $152 million. Yes. Madam Speaker, electricity prices are influenced by the price of fuel oil. In fact, the price of fuel oil is a direct pass-through to the customer. We will seek to cushion the impact of higher electricity prices on the most vulnerable. Madam Speaker, the Jamaica Public Service Company has a retail customer base of approximately 563,000 households as at February 2022. And just bear with me for a second. As at this date, the consumption bands are as follows. There are 105,000, I'll give you approximate to the nearest thousand, 106,000 households that use less than 50 kilowatt hours per month. 145,000 households that use between 50 kilowatt hours and 100 kilowatt hours per month. 129,000 households that use between 100 kilowatt hours and 150 kilowatt hours per month. 78,000 households that use between 150 kilowatts and 200 kilowatts per month. 66,000 households that use between 200 kilowatts per month and 300 kilowatts per month. 29,000 households, Madam Speaker, that use between 300 and 500 kilowatt hours per month, and 5,900 households that use between 500 and 700 kilowatts per month, 2,800 households that use between 700 and 1,000 kilowatt hours per month, and 2,300 households that use over 1,000 kilowatt hours per month. So you get an idea, Madam Speaker, of how kilowatt consumption of energy relates to standard of living. Just give you a little example. Madam Speaker, the usage of a modest-sized fridge, a television, a radio, an iron, a few light bulbs, and a few sockets by which you charge your phone equates to about 75 kilowatt hours per month. And we have over 100,000 people or households, in such a category. You add a few other appliances, a washing machine that you use very sparingly, maybe a few more rooms with their own lights, fans, and sockets, and you get up to about 150 kilowatt hours. Madam Speaker, across urban and rural areas, there are approximately 379,000 such households in Jamaica. And yes, it is the case that some empty, unrented apartments are among this number at any point in time. That is indeed the case. But arguably, these represent less than 5% of this bracket, 7% maybe, but certainly less. The overwhelming majority of households consuming less than 150 kilowatt hours per month are those on smaller incomes in our society, those on the smaller end of the consumption scale. Vendors, Madam Speaker, many security guards, housekeepers, household workers, those who clean and maintain buildings, factory floor workers, room attendants at hotels, bartenders, waiters at restaurants, handymen and porters, and many other occupations in the informal economy, and all those hard-working Jamaicans, Madam Speaker, in addition to the groups I mentioned, all those other hard-working Jamaicans on minimum wage or just a little more. We are concerned, Madam Speaker, that those on lower incomes are adversely affected by much higher energy prices at this time, and more of their income is consumed by electricity consumption. So when we construct social assistance policies to respond to times like these, we wish to target lower income groups. It's only morally right, Madam Speaker, that the proceeds of these temporary social assistance resources go to these persons first. So, Madam Speaker, we propose a temporary intervention on behalf of those JPS customers in the lowest consumption deciles. Now, some will add that, okay, I get you, but not only persons on the lowest incomes are affected, and I agree. At 200 kilowatts of energy consumption, the customer would probably be living modestly in a housing scheme or in a multifamily dwelling in an urban community. And this level of energy consumption, while not particularly associated with lower incomes, is not associated with higher income either. In an effort, Madam Speaker, to include some in the middle, Madam Speaker, we'll add those who consume 200 kilowatts of electricity to our temporary intervention effort. So, Madam Speaker, adding this group brings the total number of households on whose behalf we propose this temporary intervention based on the figures from the JPS as at February 2022 to 457,786 households out of a total of 563,451, Madam Speaker, or 81% of the JPS retail customer base. Madam Speaker, the top 19% of households account for nearly half of JPS's household billing, with the bottom 81% accounting for approximately the other half. So, Madam Speaker, the government of Jamaica will be implementing on a temporary basis the We Care Energy Copay, where the government of Jamaica will contribute 20% of the JPS bill for all households that consume 200 kilowatt hours of electricity or less per month for the months of April, May, June, and July of 2022. Madam Speaker, 81% of households will benefit from this temporary Government of Jamaica initiative to cushion the impact of rising energy prices. And this, Madam Speaker, is expected to cost in the region of $2 billion. Now, Madam Speaker, JPS also has prepaid customers. So those are the postpaid who get their bill every month. JPS also has prepaid customers who pay in advance for small amounts of electricity at a time by topping up their accounts. The Government of Jamaica, through the Jamaica Social Investment Fund, which is in the Office of the Prime Minister, has been regularizing communities where unauthorized electricity connection was once the norm. And I want to name some of the communities that have been regularized so far. I'll start with communities in my own constituency: Marvelly in Kingston, Tower Hill, Madam Speaker, Cassava Peace in Kingston, Standpipe, residents in August Town and Majesty Gardens, Madam Speaker,
West Kingston,
Homestead in St. Catherine, Canaan Heights, Steer Town in St. Anne, Copperwood in St. James, Lilliput, Granville in St. James, among many other communities. The idea there is to get persons who would normally, who in the past would have had unauthorized access to electricity, to now have authorized access. And they start by being prepaid customers, build up a track record, and then if they want, after building a track record, they can transition to postpaid. Now, Madam Speaker, we will extend, and not extend, the We Care Energy Copay program will assist these prepaid customers as well. For the months, Madam Speaker, of April, May, June, and July, every JPS electricity prepaid top-up purchased will receive bonus credit from the Government of Jamaica representing 20% of the top-up amount. So, Madam Speaker, we have increased the $2 billion allocation in the opening budget to approximately 2.95, inclusive of the loan financing I mentioned. The $2 billion for the We Care Energy Copay, the $600 million for the taxi program, that's 2.6, 150 for path transportation increases of 40%, That gives you 2.75, and I added the $200 million loan, even though that's not an expenditure, it's a loan. And Madam Speaker, when you add the allocation to NGOs this month and other food programs that we alluded to, this is a total amount of $3.7 billion. Madam Speaker, the government is working to cushion the impact of the rise in fuel prices on those who need it most. No social assistance program in the world has perfect targeting, meaning no social program, Madam Speaker, is such that everyone who receives is in need, nor does any social program, such that it has perfect efficiency, meaning that everyone you intend to target receives. So neither of those two things is true. And that's not the standard by which social programs are judged. This targeting, Madam Speaker, by energy consumption is highly recognized as correlated with your overall consumption basket, but also with incomes. So, Madam Speaker, in closing, we give God thanks for the economic recovery and the jobs recovery that we're experiencing. We do not take it for granted. But even as we experience this recovery, uncertainties loom on the horizon. But we ought to see those uncertainties in their proper context and not unduly resort to an alarmist stance. The war in Ukraine has had an impact and will continue to have an impact. The impact is mostly through the price of oil, as restrictions are placed on Russia's ability to trade, and the United States has disavowed the option of purchasing Russian oil, and the EU threatens to consider doing the same. And this has caused oil prices to exhibit intense volatility, which we look on with a great degree of concern. Madam Speaker, the channels through which Jamaica can be affected or will likely be affected are through the growth channel. As inflation rears and as consumption is diverted towards energy consumption, economic growth, world economic growth, will likely slow. Just 6 days ago, the U.S. Federal Reserve reduced U.S. growth projections from 4% or just above 4% to 2.8%. So again, this is not a pandemic-like catastrophe where anybody's projecting the United States to go negative or the world to go negative. What we're talking about is a reduced level of world growth. And that can have an impact on us. One of the channels through which we experience economic activity is the tourism channel, and to the extent that world growth suffers, we can expect there to be some kind of feedback effect on Jamaica. The other channel through which we can be affected, Madam Speaker, is the impact is through the balance of payments channel with two forces at work. The first is oil prices being higher, meaning that Jamaica has to shell out more for the importation of oil. And oil futures to December are in the region of about $90. And at those kinds of levels, if they're maintained over that period of time, calculations show that that would entail an extra $500 million US of expenditure for the same volume of product that we'd have consumed last year. Now, what tends to happen as oil prices increase is that consumption goes down. There is some amount of elasticity to the product. But, an increase of $500 million in outflows is something, the prospect of it is something that the Bank of Jamaica has to pay serious attention to. The good news is that Jamaica's reserves are well in excess of the benchmark for reserves for a developing and open economy. Therefore, the BOJ has the wherewithal to handle the what could obtain over the next 12 months. But in all transparency, we're discussing it here in Parliament that we do expect if oil prices remain at these levels for the next, for this calendar year or even for 12 months, that we could see that has been an effect. Related to that and also influencing balance of payments is the fact that remittances are tied to economic growth and economic well-being in our source countries. And as that becomes more subdued, as we mentioned, the Fed lowered their estimate of U.S. growth from 4% to 2.8% just 6 days ago. Just 6 days ago. We could see that remittances don't grow as much as they have been growing, or they could stabilize. Now, the governor of the central bank, for whose responsibility the balance of payment, lies, will speak more on this. But I could not but use the opportunity of the closing budget presentation to update the country on this. Madam Speaker, we're likely to see the inflation that we've been experiencing extended over a period of time. But the good news, Madam Speaker, is that Jamaica is in a more resilient position than we have been in the past. And the most critical thing when crises come is to ensure that those crises do not precipitate a fiscal or a debt or a balance of payments crisis. That's the most important. So that the government is able and has the ability to respond. And we have shown, Madam Speaker, through the pandemic and now through this much smaller but still serious crisis on the horizon, that we retain the ability to respond, Madam Speaker, in a responsible and measured way. Madam Speaker, we will continue to monitor developments, but there's no need for alarm, as in the same way we are able to come out of the pandemic and to recover from the pandemic, Madam Speaker, Jamaica's recovery will survive the shocks that lie on the horizon. Finally, Madam Speaker, the public sector compensation restructuring, as I mentioned in my opening presentation, is a signal policy proposal for which implementation will begin this year. Now, how we have done it is that we have made a provision for the implementation, and we'll spend the next few months in continued detailed consultations with our partners in bargaining groups and in unions. And we hope, and I know all public sector employees hope, that that process is efficient and quick. We hope that by the beginning of the second quarter, which means end of June, beginning of July, that we can begin implementation. Now, to begin implementation, Madam Speaker, will require a supplementary process, simply because in this budget, we have the amounts for the compensation restructuring in a contingency area to be redeployed to the ministries, departments, agencies, etc., as we finalize the granular details of the compensation restructuring, which is a monumentally complex task, a very ambitious reform, and one for which, Madam Speaker, can't have too much support. So in final remarks, Madam Speaker, let me thank again you and thank the people of Jamaica, thank the speakers who presented for this year's 2022-2023 budget debate, Madam Speaker. And in so doing, Madam Speaker, I am going to follow procedure and request that we have second. Madam Speaker, the person that other group to thank Madam Speaker, is the Jamaica Printing Services, who have had to print all 7 budget documents. They had to print my speech 2 times, print the Prime Minister's, Leader of Opposition, Opposition spokesman, and many times because they're not physically here, or we don't interact with them physically, we cannot send a file electronically. Sometimes we forget to thank them. So on behalf of all parliamentarians, Madam Speaker, I extend thanks to them. And Madam Speaker, in so doing, I conclude the debate on the bill, and I ask that the bill be read a second time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Members, the question is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. Madam Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Apply a Sum out of the Consolidated Fund to the service of the year ending on the 31st day of March 2023, and to appropriate the sums granted in this session of Parliament and for matters connected therewith and related thereto, be now read a second time.
Members, the House will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause. Okay, members, we're now in committee stage. I put clause 1. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. I now put clause 2. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. I put clause 3. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. I now put the schedule. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. And I now put the title and the acting clause. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. Members, the question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendments. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. Members, the report of the committee is that the bill has been passed without amendments. Minister? Minister? Minister?
Madam Speaker, I ask that the bill be read a third time.
Madam Clarke? House Leader? The question is that the bill be read a third time. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Apply a Sum out of the Consolidated Fund to the service of the year ending on the 31st day of March 2023, and to appropriate the sums granted in this session of Parliament and for matters connected therewith and related thereto, read a third time and passed.
Madam Speaker, the bill. Notices. I know. Madam Speaker, there is a final item on the public business in the name of the Minister of Finance with regards to the repeal of the Jamaica Development Bank Act 2022. The Minister has a comment to make in that regard.
Madam Speaker, the bill having been read a second time, I humbly propose that the debate on it be suspended until the next sitting of the House.
The question is that the bill having been read a second time, the debate on it be suspended for a future date. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of the standing orders to allow for the recommittal of notices of motions given orally to enable me to take a motion with regards to the next sitting of the House.
Members, the question is that there is the recommittal of the item, notices of motions given orally. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move. Be it resolved that this Honourable House of Representatives approve the plans and programs being pursued by the government in respect of ministries which are not included in the debate on the appropriations bill, and further approve the policy projections as announced for the financial year 2020-2023. May it please you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business today. I just like to use on the motion of adjournment the opportunity to thank the members who have participated in what has been a really robust debate on the appropriations bill. And indeed, Madam Speaker, I think that the country could be well assured that the business of the nation is in good hands in that of our Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance. Madam Speaker, I now beg to move that the House be adjourned for a date to be fixed, and at the next sitting, based on the resolution we just approved, we will commence the sectoral debate on that occasion. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Members, the question before the House is that the House be adjourned for a date to be announced. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. This Honourable House is now adjourned.
People always say government must be held accountable. But it's whose job to keep government accountable?